Hello, everyone. I'm Harvey Brownstone, and today I'm pleased to welcome a veteran attorney, civil justice advocate, and award-winning author of 7 novels known as the Zachary Blake Legal Thriller Series. He draws upon his 44 years as a trial lawyer and his passion for justice to base his novels on real issues confronting ordinary citizens whose lives are under attack. And he writes a very popular blog filled with hard-hitting commentaries about current justice issues. I'm delighted to welcome Mark M. Bello to our show. Mark, thank you so much for joining us.
Harvey, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Mark, you're a well-known trial lawyer with a reputation for fearlessness. You were one of the first lawyers to sue the Catholic Church over sexual abuse in the 80s. You based your first novel, Betrayal of Faith, on that experience. Do you consider that to be your most important case?
Well, it was the case of my life, and I wouldn't say it's the case that produced the best results because it was a long time ago, but it's the case that has stayed with me since almost the very beginning of my career, and it was the most disturbing case I had. So yeah, I mean, in many ways, it was the case of my life, and it inspired my first book. I always said to myself for years and years and years that I would write a book about the experience, what it felt like, and that's what I did.
You've always fought for the underdog. Where did this passion come from?
Oh, my parents. I'm a Jewish boy. It was always be a doctor, be a lawyer, be a professional, fight for the little guy. Most of who I am and what I've done comes from them. They're the greatest.
They must have inspired a strong sense of social justice in you.
They did, but personal experiences did that too. I'm a child of the 60s, Vietnam War era, etc. I watched the civil rights movement become a thing. And again, as a Jewish person, the descendant of Holocaust survivors, oppression, discrimination, beating down the little guy has always been a thing for me. And that was true in my practice, and it's true in my writing as well.
You know, a lot of lawyers went to law school because they wanted to make a positive difference in people's lives and change the world. But somehow it doesn't happen for many lawyers. Who are the lawyers that you look up to?
Any lawyer who takes on Goliath and represents David is a lawyer who I admire. Whether that's Jerry Spence or F. Lee Bailey or Johnny Cochran or somebody famous, great. But all the little guys in the trenches, all the trial lawyers out there who take on insurance companies or big corporations or the government are people I admire. And there are many who do it, by the way, for very little profit, like those who take on hate groups and what have you on behalf of nonprofits. So I don't want to leave those people out either. Brian Stevenson comes to mind.
I'm shaking in my boots as I ask you this question, but I can't resist. What do you think of the judges you've appeared in front of over the years?
Judges are people too. They come in all shapes, sizes, and ideologies. Some I love, some I didn't care for at all.
Mark, your novels deal with issues ripped from the headlines. Your second novel, Betrayal of Justice, features a bigoted president, Islamophobia, white supremacists, and a deeply divided nation. You were definitely sounding the warning bell about where the United States was headed as a nation, weren't you?
I was indeed. The book was the second after my life experience book, Betrayal of Faith. I wasn't sure, frankly, Harvey, that I was an author. I didn't know that I had books in me about topics that I didn't handle personally, like clergy abuse in the Catholic Church. So writing that novel was my introduction to social justice topics that were in the news rather than necessarily specific to my practice. What happened was I'm watching news in the 2016 era, and I'm thinking to myself, can Trump actually beat Clinton? And what would the country look like if he did? Now, I wrote a fictional account of a person who was a candidate for president, not the president. And once the book came out, I got a lot of pushback from the right about doing what they called a hit job on the president. And my response has always been, I wrote a book before he became president. the president I wrote about, the anti-Muslim, anti-minority, anti-Mexican, anti-immigrant bigot that I wrote about is not Donald Trump. If Donald Trump chose to imitate that fictional president, that's on him, not on me.
Good answer. Your third novel, Betrayal in Blue, deals with white supremacy. Why do you think white supremacy has been on the rise in America?
On the rise is probably a mischaracterization of what's happening in America. What I believe is happening in America is that white supremacy has always been there. It has been hiding under the radar, and a president like Trump who comes out and makes it okay, essentially, to be anti-Muslim, to be anti-immigrant, to be anti-Jewish, to be anti-minority. Everybody came out of the woodwork. They were already there and decided it was okay to be more public about it. I believe that's also what caused January 6th to happen. He just seems to inspire those elements of our society, those undercurrents of our society that have prejudicial views. And it's very troubling to me. I don't believe they've not been there. I just believe they've been less able to express their views until Trump became president.
Do you think that white supremacists being so vocal in recent years have caused damage that's irreparable?
I believe in America. I believe in a multicultural society. I believe we've come a long way. I believe there are a minority of our citizens. I believe a majority of our citizens, both in the United States and Canada for that matter, believe in a multicultural environment and society. And no, I don't think it's irreparable. I think we will win the day. I think our Davids will beat their Goliaths.
I sure hope so, Mark. Your fourth novel, Betrayal in Black, deals with an innocent Black man shot by police. You wrote that book in 2019, and to me, it's astounding that we're still dealing with this issue today. Do you think the Black Lives Matter movement will ultimately make a difference to the realities of racism in the justice system?
I don't know necessarily that it would be the Black Lives Matter movement. Actually, I think it's us, Harvey. It's white people who have to recognize kind of what I just said about white supremacy, the challenges of living with people who are not like you are, but have the same rights as you do, and should have the same opportunities that you do. We as a majority society need to recognize that, lift them up, and realize that we're all better if all of us succeed rather than just some of us. That's really how I believe. I don't think it's a Black Lives Matter thing. I think it's more of a duty of white lives to recognize that Black Lives Matter.
What's your take on the police? You must have cross-examined hundreds, if not thousands, of police officers during your career. We keep seeing incidents that shock us having to do with young Black men. What's the answer?
There's some answers in my book, Betrayal in Black, but I have more questions than answers. What I believe is that a lot of old school police officers are inherently racist. I truly believe that, unfortunately. And what I think we need is a whole new breed and a whole new method of training and a whole new focus on recruiting more inclusive officers. And by the way, I don't think racism in the police officer community is limited to white people. I think you'll find that in inner cities like Detroit, for instance, where I live, you will have many Black officers who approach a Black person a hell of a lot differently than they approach a white person in a traffic stop. And Betrayal in Black, the victim is a Black man. He's confused in the officer's mind with some teenage fast food restaurant robbers. He's a 40-year-old man. He's driving with his family, 2 kids in the car and his wife. The officer decides that the driver is a teenager and his wife is his co-robber teenager. He comes to the window and sees a middle-aged man and his wife and 2 kids in the car, and still he persists. There's an inherent racism in this man that lies underneath in the underbelly of his psyche, and he just can't get over it. In the book, by the way, he is tormented by this. He doesn't realize he's a racist. And I find in my research that that's true in a lot of these situations. A person who thinks he's colorblind really isn't under the surface. That's a problem as well.
How does a person overcome and improve themselves if they don't even know that they're a racist?
Self-awareness, coming to terms with your own indecency, if you will. I'm not saying it's easy, but the book is a study in policing, in societal problems, in problems in the justice system. I don't think I need to tell you that you take these so-called perpetrators, and a Black person who is accused of even a minor crime is A, much more likely to be convicted, and B, much more likely to be sentenced in a harsher manner than a white person is. And that's post-police. You know, if you look at George Floyd, for instance, which happened long after I wrote this book, unfortunately, these things keep happening. But if you look at that case, you have a cop who thinks he can not only arrest, but he can hold a trial, he can convict, he can carry out a sentence of death, all over a counterfeit $20 bill. We got to do better than that, Harvey. We just have to do better.
I couldn't agree more. Your fifth novel, Mark, Betrayal High, deals with shootings in schools. Do you think that effective gun control in America can ever go hand in hand with the Second Amendment?
That's an interesting question. I don't know the answer to that. I think it should, and that's a different answer to a different question.
I'm not sure it's that different. The fact is that in every first world country except the United States, there is effective gun control. And we don't see the volume of gun violence that we see in the United States. And for some reason, the Second Amendment is interpreted in such a way that permits this gun violence to keep happening, even in schools. So my question to you, and I can't think of someone better to ask than you because of your background, how can we ever see proper gun control like we see everywhere else, as long as the Second Amendment is interpreted the way it is?
Well, first of all, you kind of made your own point, and that is that these other countries that you speak of, including Canada, do not have a Second Amendment. And for whatever reason, positive or negative, the Second Amendment has become rooted in our American society and culture. It has become a rallying cry for those who believe that it means unfettered access to guns, which it doesn't. And until we come to terms with the fact that the Second Amendment doesn't permit this proliferation of guns, nor does it permit the severity of types of guns that people have access to, until we as a society come to terms with that, we're not going to get very far. Betrayal High is not just about the gun industry. It's about bullying as well. It's about greed. It's about politics. It's an interesting study of the root causes, all of them, of a mass school shooting. Aside from the easy and careless availability of guns, self-esteem issues for kids who aren't necessarily a part of high school's mainstream, the bullying of almost helpless children, and even parental indifference plays a part in these incidents, at least the way I wrote the book. There's a greedy gun manufacturer, don't get me wrong. He sells guns on the black market. He encourages people to find them any way they can. He likes making money. He uses a European network to make sure that guns get where he wants them to get. He's in bed with the president of the United States, the same one that I wrote about in my second novel. So all of those things are part of this culture as well. But until we come to terms with the fact that the Second Amendment simply says we have a right to bear arms to offset the possibility of an oppressive government, that's basically what the Second Amendment's about. Until we come to terms with that's all it says, we're going to continue to have this kind of problem.
What's it going to take, Mark? I mean, every time there's an incident, a tragedy, the rest of the world is thinking, okay, they've got to get the point now that the Second Amendment couldn't have been meant to apply to automatic weapons and some of these horrible guns that are meant to kill many people at once, and yet nothing happens. What's it going to take?
I don't know. I just don't know. If Sandy Hook didn't do it, what possibly could? If Parkland didn't do it, which kind of inspired, by the way, Betrayal High, I don't know what will. If things like that don't inspire society to recognize that troubled kids can easily get their hands on automatic weapons and blow everybody away at their school, whether they're kids that were bullied or not. I don't know, Harvey. I don't know what it will take. It will take, I believe, a shift in our politics. I think our politics needs to make a move toward a more stringent attitude about gun rights.
Are you disappointed as a lawyer that the courts haven't interpreted the Second Amendment to say it applies to the kinds of guns that existed when the Second Amendment was written? It doesn't apply to the types of guns that were invented afterwards. To me, that would have been such an easy legal interpretation that would have at least eliminated automatic weapons. I'm disappointed as a legal person. Are you?
I'm disappointed, yes. As to whether or not the Second Amendment ought to be limited to muskets, I don't know. We've come a long way on, unfortunately, on the creation of weapons. So I don't know that we can realistically sit here and say, since the level of technology for gun manufacturers has, or weapons manufacturers for that matter, has exceeded the two-shot musket of 1776, I don't think that logic follows. Having said that, yes, it's very disappointing that our courts of appeals, our Supreme Court, has upheld gun rights to the tune that it has. And to your point, not another country in the civilized world has revered guns the way America does. It's very bothersome to me. I don't have a solution for it, but I'm troubled by it just as you are.
Your sixth novel, Supreme Betrayal, deals with a Supreme Court nominee who's been accused of sexually assaulting a young woman 20 years ago. When we look at real life events, and I think you know the events I'm referring to, do you think that the Me Too movement has been effective in the kind of scenario you wrote about in Supreme Betrayal?
I think it's starting to. Obviously, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand that that book was inspired by the Kavanaugh hearings. Like Betrayal of Justice, I got accused of doing a hit job on Brett Kavanaugh. And I will tell your listeners and your viewers that the evil character created in Supreme Betrayal is not in any way, shape, or form Brett Kavanaugh. He's probably the most evil character I've created. He's a predator. He's capable of almost any crime as serious as murder. He's guilty, and Brett Kavanaugh was never proven guilty. My guy, I make it very, very clear in the first chapter that he's the perpetrator and that he's guilty of an attempted rape. To your question, Me Too has brought awareness, much more awareness to these types of events, and women are much more able to speak truth to power than they were in the past.
A lot of people say, why do victims wait 10, 20, sometimes longer years to make a complaint against someone just at the time when they've become high profile? How do you feel about limitation periods for sexual assault complaints?
Typically, in these Me Too cases, you have a powerful man preying on a less powerful woman, and a fear that it will damage them in their career, in their public esteem, in their self-esteem. A lot of women in these situations feel they did something to bring it on. Did I lead him on? Did I give him the wrong impression? Did I flirt? So there's a lot of guilt in these cases, but most of the time it's oppressions. It's having power oppress the powerless. And what Me Too has done is it's given women a platform and a voice to air their grievances, rightfully so. Having said that, the one thing I would be troubled by is the use of that platform to bring false allegations and the tendency to believe the false rather than the truth about somebody who may not have committed a sexual assault. The perpetrator in my book is clearly a predator. That's the main difference. He's wealthy. When the crime happened, he was a wealthy, entitled law student. 20 years later, he's a Court of Appeals judge, and he's a candidate and the president's choice as a nominee for the U.S. Supreme Court. And this woman, inspired by Me Too, although Me Too is not a prominent feature in the book, she's inspired and emboldened to come forward using my protagonist, Zachary Blake, as her attorney, and she testifies before Congress and attempts to prevent his nomination from becoming a reality. I think women need to do that, and that's what the book is intended to inspire.
So, what do you say to men who say it's just so easy for someone to come up with an accusation 10 or 15 or 20 years later? There are never any witnesses there. It's her word against mine. How does the justice system possibly tell whether this really happened or not, and be satisfied beyond a reasonable doubt? Do you have faith that courts are able to tell whether an allegation is true or false?
To be determined, Harvey. I don't. Do I have faith? Some. I've seen the justice system up close and personal. I've seen it succeed and I've seen it fail. So it's certainly capable of failing. The statute of limitations, for instance, it protects predators, just as you said. Tort reform, measures passed by Congress to limit people's access to courts. Behind our backs, by the way. The school shooting book, Betrayal High, talks about the Lawful Commerce and Arms Act that was signed by President Bush back in the early 2000s. It basically gives almost blanket immunity to gun manufacturers for the illegal or unjust use of their products. Product manufacturers lobbying Congress for immunity or limitations on dollar amounts when they get hit in lawsuits. Cops, you've heard in the George Floyd case about the immunity cops enjoy in performing their duties, and how Derek Chauvin had to be proven probably more than innocent till proven guilty. He had a greater presumption of innocence than a citizen enjoys. So all of those things trouble me in the justice system. Do I have faith? Yes, I have faith. Do I think it's going to be an easy path? No, I don't. I like I said earlier, I think we have to change politically.
Did you ever consider seeking a judicial appointment? Did you ever consider seeking a judicial appointment?
I considered running for a judge. I wasn't political enough back then, back in the days where I would have been considered for a political judicial appointment. I never considered myself that political.
Did you ever consider running for public office at any time?
No, not really. No.
So, Mark, how much of you is there in your star character, the high-profile lawyer Zachary Blake?
There's a great deal of who I would have liked to have been. He's quite a character. He starts out in the first book as a down-and-out, almost alcoholic loser, regains his moxie after he tried to sell out the client who put her children's lives in his hands. He attends a meeting, gets a quick offer that he thinks will help him reestablish himself. So he sells her out for the money. She dresses him down. She fires him. He begs her, literally, almost on his knees, to hire him back, promises to be her knight in shining armor, and uses that inspiration to resurrect his career. And in the balance of the books, he creates quite a career for himself, becomes a huge success. Maybe that should come with a spoiler alert. 6 novels later, he's quite a thing. My little practice was successful, but not as successful as Zachary Blake's practice. I was not as dynamic and inspirational as a Goliath slayer as he was, or he is. So I would say he's more like I want to be or wanted to be. And he's the pieces of many other lawyers who I've encountered both in my career and in the news, a little bit of a Jerry Spence, a little bit of a Johnny Cochran, a little bit of that cockiness, that confidence, that narcissism, if you will, that a successful trial lawyer has to have. I wasn't like that, but I think there has to be some element of that in a successful trial lawyer.
Certainly, a big ego is helpful for a litigation lawyer, I think.
No question, no question.
So, has Zachary Blake ever surprised you as a writer?
Yes, he's gone in directions far beyond things I originally intended for him. As I indicated earlier, I didn't see myself as an author. I saw myself as a lawyer fulfilling a bucket list item. In my 30s, I handled this case. I thought the way the church behaved was deplorable. They covered up the crime. They transferred the priest. They would move him into a community and not tell the community who he was or what he did. I not only brought the perpetrator to justice, but I exposed the conspiracy. I punished the conspirators, at least financially. My fictional reporting is consistent with how the actual church behaved in my case and in other cases, as you've seen in the news. I not only wanted to expose them locally as I did. I'm one of the few lawyers, for instance, back then, who didn't agree to a confidentiality agreement or a non-disclosure agreement or allow my file to be sealed. People were offered money for those kinds of things to take place back then. The priest I sued and the Archdiocese of Detroit that I sued were parties to a first case that I had trouble discovering because there was a confidentiality agreement and a non-disclosure agreement and a court seal. The court was complicit in sealing the file and preventing the disclosure of the previous incident. I had to find out about it through private investigation. I refused to participate in that. I convinced my clients to refuse to participate in that. And when they transferred the priest to Cleveland, Ohio, after he left Detroit, this case followed him. And the case followed him everywhere he went after that until he was defrocked. A little side note, right now in America, attorneys general all over the country are pursuing criminal actions against these priests from the 70s and 80s, including the one I sued now. And part of that interesting side note is I took a deposition of a bishop in Oakland County, Michigan, which is a suburb of Detroit. He lied to me, of course, as did the Archbishop of Detroit, who was a candidate for the papacy back then. The Oakland County gentleman got transferred to a community in Illinois, Joliet, Illinois, where he became the Archbishop, but he was recently the Archbishop of Joliet, Illinois. Where did the priest I sued end his career? Joliet, Illinois. Where did he get arrested based on the Michigan Attorney General's investigation? Joliet, Illinois.
Mark, your most recent book, Le Dor Vidor, is a Holocaust novel inspired by true events. It's a flashback to Zachary Blake's childhood, and his grandfather tells him what he went through during the Holocaust. Is this book based on the experiences in your family?
I would say inspired by accounts from family members. It's a novella. It's 39 pages long. Your listeners and viewers can obtain the book on my website at markmbello.com for free by subscribing. I read an account actually of a Polish Christian prisoner of war who escaped from Auschwitz. And that escape, it was a very interesting and exciting escape. The account of my family members and that escape is what inspired L'Adore Vador. It's a prequel. It takes place at the time of Zachary Blake's bar mitzvah, and his grandfather is a Holocaust survivor. He's a person who escaped Auschwitz, and he has promised for years that he would tell Zachary the story when he became a man. And that is the theme of the book. Zachary is bar mitzvahed. It's Friday night. They have Shabbos dinner, and after dinner, they retire to the old man's study, where he tells him the exciting story of his escape from Auschwitz. It was an enjoyable experience writing a different type of novel than a legal thriller.
Mark, is there any chance that any of your books might be made into movies?
I think they'd be great. They'd not only be great movies. I think they'd be terrific episodes for like a Netflix or a Prime series.
Well, it seems clear that your novels are not meant simply to entertain. You want to educate your readers and inspire public awareness and encourage people to stand up for their rights. Am I right?
Absolutely. My small practice was a local practice. I satisfied my clients. I made them whole, I hope. I achieved some measure of justice for them. What this novel writing career does for me is it allows me to broaden the scope of my audience, send my message or bring my message to many more people. My biggest complaint, if you will, as a lawyer is how the wool is being pulled over the public's eyes right in front of them. They really have no idea how limited the legislature and big pharma, big tobacco, big industry, big insurance, the measures that they are taking, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, in concert with these big corporate interests, huge money political interests, are taking in screwing individual citizens. And I don't mean in a good way.
Well, I want to read a quote to you. I'm quoting something you've written. People's rights are being drastically eroded by government, political and corporate greed and influence, and most citizens are unaware of the harm being done. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes. Take, for instance, the act I mentioned, the Lawful Commerce and Arms Act. It restricts people's rights to sue for incidents involving guns. If a gun is used the way it's intended, which is to shoot people, right? I mean, people say, oh, I want guns for hunting. Hunting what? But if you use a gun and you kill someone, I'm sure you've heard the phrase, guns don't kill people, people kill people. I don't agree with that. If you make guns readily available to people, to killers, they're going to use a gun to kill. And I think if you hold the gun industry responsible for making guns easily available to people like that, without any background check or with limited background checks, or allowing them to flourish on the black market, I think you should be responsible for that. The Lawful Commerce and Arms Act makes it more difficult to do that. If you look at product liability cases, tobacco cases, pharmaceutical cases, Michigan, for instance, has a drug immunity law that says that if a drug has been approved by the FDA, a Michigan citizen cannot sue the drug manufacturer, period. Why did they do that? Because they thought they could encourage drug manufacturers to locate in Michigan. Not a single one has. And our citizens can't pursue litigation for a bad drug. Those are the kinds of things I'm talking about. It goes on and on, by the way. The immunity I spoke about in police brutality cases, immunity in governments. If you've heard the phrase governmental immunity, there are several different situations where you can't pursue lawsuits against the government. In a lot of cases, you have to ask permission of the government to sue the government. In the malpractice arena, there have been several barriers placed in front of lawyers to be able to not only sue doctors, but their ability to collect damages against those doctors or hospitals are limited financially. So there's tons of things happening in legislatures, not only nationally, but locally and statewide, that restrict people's access to courts and access to justice. So that's what I was talking about.
Mark, you wrote that you believe that Michigan State University failed in its response to the case of Larry Nassar, the former U.S. gymnastics doctor accused of sexually assaulting more than 150 women and girls. What did they do wrong?
Well, they did what the Catholic Church did. They covered up the crime. They enabled him. They limited access to information about his behavior, and they didn't shut him down after they knew about it, and that's deplorable to me.
Have you got another book in the works?
I just finished a book about the immigration crisis. It's tentatively called Betrayal at the Border. All of my books, as you may have noticed, have a betrayal theme. The book tells the story of immigration from two different points of view. A young Muslim woman returns to Syria, Kobani, to introduce her young daughter to her grandmother after she believes the turmoil in Syria has lessened, and she finds herself kidnapped by ISIS, her and her daughter. The second theme or story is a illegal immigrant family. Obviously, if it's a family, the kids were born in America, they're not illegal. A husband and a wife who work at a plant in the downriver section of the Detroit area. The plant is raided by ICE. The parents are arrested. The kids are apprehended and put in a detention center. The family is separated. And Zachary Blake's job in all of this is to save the Syrian Muslim woman and her child, and to reunite and save the immigrant family from South America.
Are you still practicing law? As I can't understand how you find time to practice law as a litigator, write novels, write your blog. How do you do all of that?
Well, I have a small company that finances litigation. I don't practice law anymore, and I spend most of my time doing my political activism thing, blogging, podcasting, etc., and writing novels. I'm just now starting a new podcast. It will be called Justice Counts. The reason I created the theme of justice is I believe justice means more than necessarily the law. It's not, justice could mean a lot of things. You apply for a job. Why does this person have better opportunities toward that job or to get that job than that person does? There's an injustice there. If you hire the less qualified white person, for instance, than the more qualified black person, that doesn't necessarily end up in court, Harvey. So justice has many more meanings to me than just courtroom justice.
For sure, for sure. Mark, it's been great having you on our show. Your books are educational, inspirational, and thought-provoking, and those are my favorite kind of books. And your passion and commitment to civil rights and social justice make you a great ambassador for the legal profession, and I'm proud of that. It's truly been an honor to have you on our show. Thank you so much, Mark.
Thank you very much for having me.
Our guest has been attorney, justice advocate, and author Mark M. Bello. My name is Harvey Brownstone. Thank you to our producer, Steve Silver. Thank you all for joining us. See you next time.
Remember to subscribe to the Harvey Brownstone Interviews YouTube channel. And be sure to check out more great interviews with Harvey Brownstone on harveybrownstoneinterviews.com.